Hi church, Pastor Renier here. We live in an extraordinary time with an extraordinary opportunity to share the gospel. And therefore, join me for my mini midweek message. It is time to shine. Welcome to our third message of the holiday edition. As you can see, standing in my kitchen. And it's wonderful to have you with us today. We are continuing our short series on courageous prayers. And today, it is my aim and it is my desire to drill a little bit deeper, because I know that for many, we have a preconceived idea of what prayer looks like. And we live often, and sad to say, it's almost as if we are standing at a restaurant and we're looking into the window and we're watching someone having a delicious meal. We can perhaps smell it if the door's open, but unfortunately, we don't get to taste it. And so this is a great opportunity to take that very next step into our prayers. And it takes courage, because today's prayer is leading us to a space of being vulnerable with God. It is a space where we are going to invite the Lord into our hearts. We are going to invite Him to areas of our lives, even unknown areas in our lives, to point out the parts where we are struggling to trust God wholeheartedly. And this courageous prayer, I think the greatest or the biggest one is in Psalm 139, verse 23 and 24. Now let me start off by saying that as I was growing in my prayers and I was struggling, and yes, as a pastor, we think that, people think that your pastors pray perfectly. Let me tell you that prayer is probably one of the toughest things to be equipped in and to spend time with God. And so I was challenged. I was at this point where my prayers felt mechanical, it felt very systematic and outright boring. And I had preconceived ideas of what prayer should look like, how you should approach it. And this very passage challenged me to take all of that off the table and just sit with God and allow Him and myself to have a very intimate conversation. Are you ready? Psalm 139. Search me, O God, know my heart, test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me and lead me in the way everlasting. Now, it is easily to jump and to say, it's a test of trust. Can you trust God enough? If you've got fear, bring on all of that. What I love about this verse, this specific two verses, in a way that it is actually incredibly intimate. It is more than just about things that we are afraid of. It actually talks about relationship. You see, it's easy to get along with me if I am happy with you. But the moment when those things get challenged, the moment that there are relational things that come up, the moment our wives, our spouses and our kids and our colleagues and relational issues turn up, when it gets challenging, this verse really comes to life. I love the way that David, when he wrote the psalm, even he was entitled in terms of relationship. Things were done by his enemies and people who opposed him, and even though he was entitled, and he penned this psalm down and he praised God of His glory, and you've got to read the whole psalm to get all of this. But what I love about this, right at the end, even though in his heart he was entitled, even though he was correct, in fact everything was in his favor, he started off this whole conversation. He said, Lord, search me first, know my heart. And this is where the prayer really gets courageous. I started to pray this, just these verses. I started every morning. I said, Lord, search me, know my heart, test me, know my anxious thoughts. In this space, what I found was that I started over time, I started to have a conversation with God about what anxiety and what stresses and fears were in my life, and I started to write them down in my secret spaces, and the more I started to write them down, the more the Spirit revealed in me areas of my life where my relationships with people were suffering because of my anxiety, because of everything that I held back. So I want to invite us into a very courageous space. It goes on, it's a space where you allow God to enter your life, to point out areas in your life where you can grow, to allow you to have a kingdom picture, a kingdom identity. And the joy of the gospel in that is the more you grow in that kingdom identity, the more Christ-centered you become. And the more Christ-centered you become, the more gospel-focused you are. And you know what is the beauty of a gospel-focused way of living? You live from your weakness and you point to the strength of Jesus. And so the third part, the second part of that was, he said, see if there's any offensive way in me. I have found this probably the toughest part, because most often I would feel people are offended to me, their offenses against me. But when I started to pray this, I realized that there were certain areas in my life that I needed to deal with. And the more I get into this space, the more I was humbled, the more I realized how Jesus' death on the cross and his resurrection was the greatest equalizer for all human lives. It led me to the third part. And I find once you come through this part, it's almost easy. Or maybe I say it's easier. Lead me in the way everlasting. God has placed eternity in our hearts. And he has sent Jesus to pay the way, and the Holy Spirit to confirm that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And so this psalm is something I want to encourage you over the next week. Every morning, if there's nothing else that you pray, take this courageously to God. But be warned. When we start praying these prayers, it breaks into our minds, into our hearts and our souls for the better, but it can be challenging. So let me just close and say, search me, God, know my heart, test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there's any offensive way in me and lead me in the way everlasting.